On the 14th of June 1969, a man climbed down a ladder onto the moon. His name was Alexei Leonov, and the flag he planted was red. The Americans arrived 5 weeks later, but those 5 weeks changed the meaning of Apollo. America was no longer racing to be first, it was racing to make sure the Soviet victory did not become permanent. Today, nearly 300 people live on the moon. They live in 3 permanent settlements under 3 political systems, surrounded by machines that keep them alive one failure at a time. And none of their governments can agree who owns the ground beneath them. To understand how this timeline changes, start with what actually happened. The Soviet Union did not lose the moon race only because its rockets failed. Its rockets failed partly because its program was divided. Several chief designers competed for money, engines, and political support. They duplicated projects, concealed failures, and undermined one another. One man was powerful enough to hold much of it together: Sergei Korolev. Korolev had built the rockets that launched Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin, but even his name was a state secret, so was the condition of his heart. In January 1966, Korolev entered hospital for surgery. He never came out. Without him, the lunar program lost its strongest organizer. The giant N-1 moon rocket flew 4 times. It failed 4 times. The Soviet Union abandoned its crude lunar program without ever admitting publicly that it had been in a race. Now change one event. In 1964, a Kremlin doctor notices Korolev's heart problem during a routine examination. The operation happens earlier before his condition becomes critical. Korolev survives. Survival is not enough. Korolev understands that the Soviet Union cannot reach the moon while 3 groups are building 3 competing answers to the same problem. He uses the prestige of Gagarin's flight to demand control of a single lunar authority. The confrontation is vicious. Projects are cancelled. Senior engineers are removed. Korolev's enemies are forced into the same organization. Most importantly, the N-1 receives something it never had in our history: a facility capable of testing its entire first stage on the ground. The new program is still less organized than Apollo. Its computers are weaker, its lander is smaller, its safety margins are worse, but its failures now happen on test stands instead of during launches. Korolev also changes the objective. The first mission will not establish a base or conduct an ambitious scientific expedition. It will put one man on the surface, keep another in orbit, and bring both home, nothing more. In late 1968, an uncrewed Soviet lander touches down successfully. In February 1969, 2 cosmonauts circle the moon and return. 4 months later, Alexei Leonov and Oleg Makarov launch aboard the first crewed lunar landing mission. Makarov remains in lunar orbit. Leonov enters the tiny lander alone. There is barely enough room to move his arms. During the final descent, the automatic guidance system begins carrying him toward a field of boulders. Leonov takes manual control. He lands with less than 30 seconds of fuel remaining. Leonov remains outside for 51 minutes. He collects rocks, photographs the horizon, and plants 2 flags. One is the flag of the Soviet Union. The other is white with an image of Earth at its center. That second flag is propaganda, but clever propaganda. Moscow has defeated Washington while claiming that the moon belongs not to the Soviet Union but to all humanity. It is a promise the Soviet government does not yet understand it will be forced to keep. The ascent engine ignites. Leonov docks with Makarov in lunar orbit. 4 days later, they return to Earth alive. The Soviet Union has won the moon race. Apollo 11 lands 5 weeks later. In our history, America's political interest in the moon declined once the race had been won. Here, America has lost. That makes leaving politically impossible. Congress continues Saturn V production. Later missions test longer stays, nuclear power systems, and modular shelters. The objective changes from flags and footprints to permanent access. In 1977, the United States establishes Armstrong Station. It is not a city. It is 3 cramped modules covered in lunar soil, occupied by 4 people and supplied at enormous cost, but it is continuously inhabited. The Soviet Union responds in 1979 with Leonov Base. The moon now has 2 permanent outposts. The Cold War has acquired a second frontier. Neither side places declared weapons on the moon. Both deploy surveillance systems, powerful lasers, military communications equipment, and vehicles that could be converted for combat. Every machine is described as defensive. The environment forces limited cooperation. A failed oxygen system can kill a crew before instructions arrive from Earth. American and Soviet crews begin exchanging weather data, spare parts, and emergency procedures, their government's object. The crews continue. In 1984, an American rover and a Soviet excavator confront each other near a proposed mining site. For 9 hours, neither moves. Military forces on Earth raise their alert levels over two machines parked in lunar dust. The standoff produces the Lunar Operations Treaty. It bans weapons, requires emergency assistance, and allows temporary safety zones around active facilities. But it avoids the most important question: can anyone own lunar resources? Winning the moon race does not repair the Soviet economy. Factories remain inefficient. Agriculture remains weak. The war in Afghanistan still causes enormous damage. The lunar program does not save the Soviet system. It changes who has influence when that system begins to fail. Engineers, computer specialists, and industrial managers have greater prestige in this Soviet Union. During the 1980s, they support reforms that give the republics control over their own economies while preserving shared infrastructure. The Baltic republics still leave. Several others follow. But Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan remain inside a loose federation called the Union of Sovereign Republics. They share nuclear command, currency, launch facilities, and the lunar program. The new union is unstable, authoritarian, and frequently close to collapse. Ukraine and Russia still fight over language, money, and political power, but they fight inside federal institutions rather than as separate states with armies facing one another across a frontier. China enters the competition later, but with a different strategy. It does not try to recreate the heroic missions of the 1960s. It develops automated construction, robotic mining, and cheap cargo systems. In 2004, China lands its first crew near the lunar South Pole. By then, scientists have confirmed that permanently shadowed craters contain large quantities of water ice. The moon changes from a symbol into an industrial asset. Water can be turned into drinking water, oxygen, and rocket propellant. A base with enough ice does not need to lift every kilogram of fuel from Earth. Control of the polar deposits means control of transport throughout the space between Earth and Moon. By 2026, roughly 270 people live on the Moon. The American settlement is the largest. China controls the most productive ice fields. The Union operates most of the heavy transport vehicles and orbital fuel depots. None of the three blocks is independent. China needs foreign refining equipment. The Atlantic nations need Chinese ice. The Union needs Western electronics and access to both markets. They distrust one another, but each settlement depends on systems operated by the others. The people living there begin to see that dependence differently. They repair the reactors, they enter the mines, they absorb the radiation. Earth writes the rules and receives most of the profit. In 2029, an explosion kills 8 workers at a jointly operated fuel refinery. Investigators discover that managers on Earth delayed replacing a damaged pressure system because shutting it down would disrupt launch schedules. The workers demand local authority over safety decisions. Earth refuses. The refinery crews shut down production. Within 6 days, almost half of all traffic between Earth and the Moon is suspended. Representatives from all 3 settlements issue the Tycho Declaration. It does not demand immediate independence. It demands elected lunar representation, local control of life support systems, and a share of resource revenue. Earth's governments reject the declaration. They argue that the settlements survive only because Earth built them, supplies them, and protects them. The lunar delegates answer that dependence is not the same as ownership. The struggle becomes quiet. Navigation systems produce small errors, cargo manifests disappear. Inspection drones enter restricted areas, cooling pipes fail in ways that look like fatigue rather than sabotage. No one starts a war, everyone prepares for one. Then, in 2033, the largest solar storm in recorded history strikes Earth. Satellites fail, electrical grids collapse, communication with the Moon becomes intermittent for 11 days. Earth expects the settlements to descend into crisis. They do not. The American, Chinese, and Union settlements combine their power grids, food reserves, and transport systems. They survive without direct instructions from Earth. For the first time, the people of the Moon prove that they can govern themselves during a planetary emergency. The following year, they establish the Lunar Assembly. Earth calls it an advisory council. The Assembly calls itself the legitimate authority over every system required to sustain human life on the Moon. The immediate crisis concerns a new electromagnetic launcher built near the South Pole. It can throw cargo from the surface into lunar orbit without using rocket fuel. It can also accelerate a block of metal fast enough to destroy a spacecraft. Earth orders the launcher placed under international military inspection. The Lunar Assembly refuses. American, Chinese, and Union spacecraft begin moving toward the moon, each claiming to be protecting the facility from the others. All of this began because a doctor noticed a damaged heart 2 years earlier. Korolev lived, Leonov landed first, America stayed, and the moon became not a destination but a place where people built lives. For 65 years, every government has insisted that no nation owns the moon. Now the people living there are asking a more dangerous question. If nobody owns the moon, why should Earth rule it? The first moon race was about which flag would arrive first. The second will decide whether any Earth flag has the right to remain.